Hello, my name is Christine Hughes, and I am a member of the Association of Corporate Counsel Chapter, Northeast Chapter Board. And we are having some fun these days hunting down former ACC board members and finding out what they are up to. And so we will be talking today with Tom Farrell, who is not only a former board member, but a good friend of mine. And I will just turn this over to Tom so he can tell you a little bit about himself, his background, how he came to be in the orbit of the ACC. Take it away, Tom.
Sure. Thanks, Christine. It's wonderful to see you. Always enjoyed talking with you. So I've been practicing, as you know, for 30 years. And I started at a good sized firm in Boston and was a litigator for roughly 9 years. And towards the end of that period, I had thoughts about doing something else with my career, not being a litigator for the rest of my life, and was looking to do transactional work. Ultimately, I got a good opportunity to go in-house at a large multinational, Tyco International, and had a very good experience there for, another 6.5 years, and learned how to do deals, had a terrific mentor, very well-educated lawyer who was doing as many deals, probably more than the big firm lawyers because of the growth by acquisition strategy, and then doing all the other things that in-house lawyers do, employment issues, general contract work,
putting out fires.
Yeah, putting out fires and not having enough minutes in the day. And so I did that for about 6.5 years. Ultimately, under the new management, was the co-lead M&A lawyer, which was a job involving the sale of about 36 businesses in a very short period of time. But when I left the law firm and went in-house, I made a vow to myself that I would not be without a network again in my life, because when I wanted to leave, it was very difficult to leave the law firm because I had spent most of my time billing in increments and not keeping in touch with my network. So the company, I was working for them in New Hampshire, and I informally set up a network and a gathering of various in-house lawyers in New Hampshire. And unbeknownst to me, ACC at the time was trying to grow its New Hampshire membership. So a good friend, Evan Kaplan, who was on the board, heard about it and asked if ACC could co-sponsor it. And I said, sure. And within a month, I was on the board and stayed on.
That is the ACC way.
Yeah. And within, 2 or 3 years, I was the president and then stayed on through my in-house career. And then, as we go along, I can talk more about my life after ACC and in-house. But that sort of brings me up to the point where I joined ACC and had a good run with it.
Mm-hmm. And did you continue to expand your network, and was AC part of that?
Absolutely. So I got deeply involved with ACC. I was on the board, and I got involved in the programs committee. So I was helping to put together the monthly programs that ACC was doing in the Northeast, and worked side by side with some terrific people and also some very good law firms. So got to know the industry better, got to know my in-house peers better. The board meetings were wonderful. It was just a great group of lawyers, a great class of people, and they became my friends. And they let me into their networks too. And so through the programs and through dinners, my network grew exponentially. So that was one takeaway, was that my network grew, but also I think my networking skills, I was able to hone by just being a part of the ACC environment and putting programs together and working with others and reaching out. I was on the membership committee, so we were reaching out to get new members. It really was excellent leadership training, I think. And it really, I found it very satisfying. I got to work with peers, and they were good people and their friends.
Yeah, well, I think you'd be pleased to know even with COVID and even doing everything virtually, that spirit has kept on. And indeed, one of the things we found is that the massive barrier to participation that is the greater Boston metropolitan area traffic is eliminated when you have Zoom meetings. I mean, there's a lot that's lost in Zoom meetings that you don't get at a dinner or a reception. But we've actually seen, it's a significant drop of a barrier to entry to participation. So, and then with Cord's excellent work, we really do have a wonderful social media growing presence. But I do want to explore, it's an unusual for people once they've gone in-house to go back into the law firm world. That's a not traditional path. Most people, when they go in-house, think they've died and gone to heaven. Talk a little bit about that. And the other reason, and I also would like you to talk a little bit about the vision you had for your firm, because I think you've carved out a niche. I am also part of a network that you probably originally built of in-house counsel. There's always, the primary thing we use it for is, do you know someone who's as good as a big law firm in Boston, but a lot less expensive and a lot more agile? And your name pops up all the time. So it's clearly you built a firm that has hit a much needed niche. So tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Sure, that's a great question. So it's not a surprise to anybody that Tyco had a difficult stretch, and I was there, before, during, and after, and I learned a great deal. It was a challenging environment because of the just the difficulty the company was in, and I was getting plenty of opportunities. The company changed, though, for good reason. It became more bureaucratic, and my role was getting more segmented and compartmentalized. I wanted to do, I'm not really a big company person. I wanted to be more entrepreneurial. And, one of the things I would encourage members or anybody, if anybody is listening or does listen to this, to do is to just find out where your strengths are and where your talents lie. And, it took me a while to realize that I would function better in a smaller or entrepreneurial organization. So it wasn't necessarily a lack of interest in the in-house world. I just felt like I had talents and skills that would be better used ultimately in a different environment. And we may talk about this later, but every step of the way, the talents I developed helped me to become better at being a lawyer and better at what I'm doing. And so even though I didn't know it then, and some of the stresses and challenges too, it made me a better professional and led to where I am now. So the question came to me in about the 6th year, and one of the things that changed is the company was not going to it changed its model, and I was the lead M&A lawyer for a large business segment, and it wasn't going to do M&A for a period of time, and the company was cutting back. So of course I was one of the first phone calls when there was a reduction in force, and I was treated very well. I liked the folks I worked with, and I was well liked, I think. And I had some ideas that I would become a business person, and I would do, and I think this is something I've heard from a lot of other in-house lawyers. They think about whether they could play a business role. And so I thought about that and explored it. At that point, this is now 6.5 years after my lesson about making sure you have a network. I had plenty of folks to talk with, and a decent segment of folks who had actually made the transition from law to business. And I asked a lot of questions. The challenge I had was, at the time I was thinking about doing this, I had 4 children under the age of 9 and was in the middle of a house renovation, and was unemployed. So it was not the ideal time to pitch myself as business person extraordinaire. But at any rate, I explored it, and I'm sure the answer is different, and it probably is different now. This was back in 2006. But I found that the individuals who made that transition had either been trusted legal advisors of a business. They had been at a big firm or a good-sized firm, and they'd been the trusted legal advisor. and they were given a chance to come in and take on a business role, or they were the internal deal lawyer and then they moved over to the corporate development function, or they went back to business school and go to business. There were a variety of examples, and none of them really were a fit for where I was. Not that that would have stopped me, because I was probably naive and overly optimistic in what I could do. But with the family situation I was in, and my wife had decided not to continue working. And so there was a fair amount of pressure to get work that actually generated income to pay for Farrell Family Enterprises. And so I kept exploring the business side, and then the light bulb went off and I'd also thought about leaving the law. But I had some good time to think, and I had a severance package, so that was helpful. And through that process of reflection, I realized that I really did like being a lawyer. And there were parts of it that I really enjoyed, parts of it I didn't like as much. And so I started to think, well, if I can build a practice that it centers around those things that I like to do, that would be pretty satisfying. That was revelation one. Revelation two was that starting a law practice on my own with 0 clients was a very entrepreneurial thing to do. And I've told other people this before, but if I knew how challenging it was before I did it, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I'm certainly glad I did do it. So at any rate, I hung a shingle, metaphorically, and I really worked hard, and my ACC contacts were very instrumental. I had a lot of help from my friends who were general counsel. And I, of course, once I went into private practice, I had to leave the board. But the friendships didn't end. And the members were very supportive. And some of them became clients. Some of them referred me to individuals who became client. My former employer was very good to me, sending work. Now, none of that is to diminish the fact that it's really hard to start a practice with 0 clients, and it didn't happen overnight. And there were some very lean times, but ultimately it got going, and it was really rewarding. And it was the right fit for me. I got to be entrepreneurial. I got to do business development. I got to network. I got to market, and I got to do the kind of legal work that I wanted, which was mainly M&A. Now, fast forward. Do you want me to keep talking, or do you want to add another question?
It's fascinating. Keep talking.
Yeah. So fast forward, I did that for almost 7 years. And toward the end of that 7-year period, I was a solo practice at the time. I wasn't getting deals that I knew I could do if the company had certain in-house resources, and I could be the lead outside counsel, and maybe they had internal tax and IP counsel and so forth. But that was mainly because they didn't know me. Of course, my former employer knew what I could do, and I knew the internal specialist. So that was an easy one, but there was only so much work that would come from that road. So I started to talk with one of my law classmates, Neil McLaughlin, who had started out at Kirkland, had been a partner at Goodwin, and he was kind of doing different things. And he wasn't real pleased with where he was. And I was asking him many times questions, because I'd do an M&A deal, and if I needed to bounce things off of somebody, there was nobody better than Neil. And over time, I said, Neil, why don't we form a practice? Given your background and skill set, and given my background and skill set, I think we could build something, and we'd need more than just the 2 of us, but we really could build something. And it took a while, but ultimately he said, yeah, I want to do that. And in short order after that, he had practiced with a top debt lawyer during a spell when he was at Proskauer, and that debt lawyer wanted to be at a boutique firm, not at a big firm. He joined. And then Steve Doyle, whom I think who has been a firm lawyer and then was chief international counsel for a number of companies, and then general counsel for some public and private companies, and lived and worked in Munich. A good friend of his best friend, really, David Bryson, knew we were looking for another lawyer. He said, Steve just left a GC job. You should talk with Steve. And that one took a while, but eventually we can convince Steve to join. And Steve, in my view, is the top international lawyer in Boston. And he's just superb. And so as is Neil and Mark until he retired, the debt lawyer. And from there we added lawyers, Kate Faust, who was she was senior in-house counsel at Wheelabrator, and then had before that had been at a boutique firm. She joined us, and then she went in-house to become the general counsel of Bottom Line Technology. And she was there for a couple of years, and she wanted to come back, believe it or not. And we welcomed her back with open arms. We were sad when she left, but it was a great career move for her to be the general counsel of a public company at a relatively young age. But we were thrilled that she wanted to come back to us. And then Bob Ventura joined. And so I could go on, but basically our concept was this. So our lawyers have practiced at Deborah Voice, Kirkland, Goodwin, Proskauer, Sherman and Sterling, Decker, Kay Scholler, which is now Arnold and Porter. So we had been at the big firms. We knew how the big firms worked. We knew how the big firm practice model worked. But I think all of us, except for one, had held very senior in-house positions, and we were accustomed to working side by side with top executives who would not let us forget that our job was to be a good lawyer for sure, but not to lose sight of the strategic and economic objectives of the business. And so we really were trained very well to think as business lawyers. And so we thought about this, and we thought there was a niche, and we just had an arbitrary cutoff at the time, under 100 million, where the deals were complicated, but they still required sophisticated counsel. On the one hand, on the other hand, they couldn't necessarily bear the freight that a bigger firm would charge. And it's no knock against big firms. If it's $1 billion deal or $2 billion, that makes a lot of sense. But there's a certain point at which the deals can be done very well with 30-year lawyers who are responding directly for good value and getting the deals done in a way that and focused on the key objectives of the client. And so we saw that opportunity. I mean, the 100 million has since moved up as a benchmark, and we're certainly doing deals above that level, but that was our starting point. And, it's really tough, I think, for the bigger firms to compete against a firm with former big firm lawyers with in-house experience who are focused in that level and who have a lower overhead model and a nimble, we're entrepreneurial, so we can talk with the client about how they want to do a deal and adjust to, make sure that we're getting paid reasonably, but the client's getting good value. So that was our model, focus on the not small, but smaller deals, sophisticated deals. And that was 2013. And it has, what are we now? That's almost 8 years. It's been a great run. We're getting more and more work and seem to have satisfied clients. So we're really happy, and it's been fun. Not going to say it hasn't been stressful, but it's been fun.
Well, and my last question, you've touched on a little bit, but I'd like to explore it a bit more. As you know, I started at two big, shiny downtown Boston law firms, and then went in-house in the higher education space, which I was for the last 30 years. But I always said to myself, if I go back into private practice, I'm going to practice very differently because of what I've learned by being a consumer of legal services.
Yep.
Give some example. I imagine that was your thought process as well. What do you do differently now in your second iteration as a law firm lawyer that you wish you had done or known about when you were starting out?
Yeah, another excellent question. I mean, part of my job when I was in-house was not just to do deals, but on much larger deals, I was managing outside counsel. And so I got to see a lot of different styles. But what I never lost was my mentor at Tyco's. He had a view that a fair deal was the best deal, and that you also needed to not be slavish about legal conventions in the sense of, well, this is market and you never do it another way. You need to think about the deal and the underlying economics of the deal and the strategic objectives of the client. You need it to be legal and compliant, of course, but within those parameters, a lawyer can add an awful lot of value, right? By not focusing on those things that are really not key economic drivers and aren't going to mean a lot to the client, but they drive up a bill, but focusing very, very closely upon those issues that are key concern. So I think the thing I learned most was a sort of a sense of proportion of what it is that's important and focusing on what is important to the client, right? Because we're service providers. What's important to the client, and you need to provide a good advice. The client certainly hasn't thought about everything in a deal, and so there'll be areas where they haven't thought about it, and you say, well, I don't know if you've thought about this issue, but here are the risks, and they think about it, and they may say we're not worried about it, or they may say, yeah, we hadn't thought about that, and so it helped me to be a lot more constructive. But I think focusing on the important issues also allows us to be more efficient and economical. So I think that has driven a model where the client gets good value, and also it's a more satisfying way to practice, and not, I'm not saying the minutia isn't important. Sometimes it's very important, but there needs to be a sense of proportion about what's more important than something else, and focusing more effort where it makes a bigger difference.
Well, thank you, Tom Farrell. It's a delight to catch up with you again, and I wish you continued good success.
Thank you, Christine, very much for this opportunity. Really enjoyed catching up with you too.